First of all, to say that we acknowledge when we were in government, Jim and myself and others, that we didn't get everything right, but we did, I think, and we are proud and right to be proud, I think, of some of the huge gains in attainment that we made. At Key Stage 2, 80% of pupils achieved level 4 or better in English in 2010. That compared with 63% back in 1997, and 80% achieved level 4 in mathematics in 2010, compared with 62% in 1997. And the proportion of pupils at the end of Key Stage 4 achieving grades A to C in 5 subjects, including English and Maths, was 55.1% in 2010, compared with 32.5% in 97. And on narrowing the attainment gap, there's a recent piece of research which was commissioned by the Financial Times that concluded that as a result of the policies of the last government, that we narrowed the attainment gap between children from rich and poor backgrounds, not as much as we would like to, but it was narrowed, and that report was commissioned by the Financial Times, as I said. We tried very much to improve the cohort of teachers through Teach First, the National Challenge, and invested in lots of programs to try and enhance the quality and status of the teaching profession, strengthening continuing professional development programs for teachers. But we're now moving into a very different educational landscape, and I think by 2015 things will be looking very different. The government's pursuing a strategy, I think you heard something about it this morning, of obviously converting most schools to academies and then having a small cohort of free schools within that system, and that's going to mean that new challenges will emerge around collaboration and coherence. Now, of course, we pioneered innovative models for schools when we were in office and had our own academies program that targeted deprivation and underperformance. Jim was schools minister at the time when we were doing some of this, and however, what's happening now is taking that approach in a completely different direction. And I think one thing that does concern me about it is there does seem to be a view right at the top in the Department of Education sometimes that rebranding in itself will produce change and improvements in attainment. And of course we know, having been in power for some time, that's absolutely not the case. It takes a lot more than just changing the name of the school and the structure of its governance if you want to get real improvements in attainment. The academies that we introduced did succeed in narrowing the attainment gap. So we are in favour of school autonomy and have been for many years on the Labour front bench, but with partnership and not in isolation. And successful schools can come in many forms. I recently visited, for example, Upper Shirley High School in Southampton, which is a cooperative school, part of a cooperative trust, around a partnership of all the schools in the area, primary schools and the local college, offering an all-through service to the community in that area. And I think this is a model that promises to develop even further. It promotes partnership working, engagement with local communities, setting the strategic direction of schools and strengthening the curriculum. And there are now more than 150 cooperative schools, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, up and down the country. And if we are having a landscape of autonomous schools, we're going to have some means that we ensure that accountability remains, even if it's not going to be via the traditional model that we are used to. Now, I've been asked to say a few things about a few different subjects, so let me touch upon them in turn so that you're not going to sue the conference organisers under the Trade Description Act. I was asked to say something about early years. It's worth reminding ourselves what our approach to early years was when we were in government. We wanted to invest in the long term for better education and health outcomes by investing in early years in order to produce a lower risk of welfare or substance dependency, lower risk of crime and imprisonment. And we had two guiding principles behind what we were doing in the early years. One was an acknowledgement that without good quality, affordable childcare, as well as significant help to access it, that women would continue to face very significant barriers to the job market and to access to true equality, but also that every child should have the best possible start in life if they're able to realise their innate potential. And of course, that's one of the reasons why many of us got involved in politics or in education in the first place. And I should probably confess to you that I was a secondary school teacher for 10 years between 1985 and the end of 1994. And you know, very much people involved in education are extremely committed to making sure that children's innate abilities are able to be realised. And that's why we put a lot into trying to lift children out of child poverty. We brought in free nursery places for all 3- and 4-year-olds. 95% of children and their families now benefit from this entitlement. We opened 3,500 Sure Start centres. We had over 20,000 schools providing access to the full core offer of childcare, extracurricular activities and other specialist support. We put a lot of money into helping parents, £3.8 million a day, in fact, parents with their childcare costs, and introduced national frameworks and standards to ensure that early years provision was of a high quality and consistently and prepared children well for schools. And got involved with local authorities, job centres and primary care trusts to try and get them working together to enhance those sorts of services that are offered to young children and parents through outlets like children's centres. Now that investment is under a real threat. The new early intervention grant, with its reduced funding and lack of ring fencing, means now that early years providers up and down the country, whether they're public, private or voluntary, are facing very significant pressures. And some local authorities are getting 25% less funding this year from the new grant than they were allocated last year from the funding streams it replaces. And that means that children's centres are now closing around the country. They're being hollowed out up and down the country. Key professionals are being laid off, and services available to parents and their children are being scaled back or in some cases cancelled. So a lot of that early years funding is in something of a mess, and some of those achievements are in danger of unravelling that I mentioned earlier on. I also want to say a few words, as advertised, about the curriculum. As you know, the government's reviewing the national curriculum at the moment, and we believe that their announcement on their review of the national curriculum, at least the first stage of that, is ready to be announced. As and when the government decide they're going to announce it is another matter, but from the information we have, we think it's ready to be announced. Although it does rather beg the question, what do they see as the real future for the national curriculum? Because if, as is their desire, the vast majority of schools have academy status by the end of this Parliament, they'll be revising, reviewing and publishing a new national curriculum which most schools in the country won't have to follow. And it makes one wonder, really, what sense can it be a national curriculum where the majority of schools don't actually have to follow it? So I think there's some serious confusion, in my view, at the centre of government about this. And on top of that, they already introduced the EBAC measure, which I've described as a nudge theory type of measure, except you nudge schools with a loaded gun. And as a result of introducing it, they did a bit of research which came to the startling conclusion that as a result of telling schools they'd be measured by how many pupils took and passed EBAC subjects, more of them were doing EBAC subjects, was the conclusion that the research came to. But what they didn't bother asking was what subjects were they not doing anymore as a result of doing the EBAC, or what courses were closing down as a result of the introduction of the EBAC. What's happening to music provision? What's happening to art or business or RE at that level? And we simply don't know, because the government didn't bother to ask the question and can't answer that question when I put it to them in parliamentary questions. In our own policy review around the curriculum, we are going to look again at the whole 14 to 19 phase and how we can foster high quality learning that combines academic rigour with quality practical education and curriculum, because we acknowledge high standards of literacy and numeracy are absolutely crucial for life chances and employability, and we're very interested in our own curriculum review to hear people's views about how we can improve results at 16 and boost English and maths take-up after the age of 16. And I know that Stephen Twigg is planning to say more about the importance of numeracy and literacy in the coming months. I've also been asked to say a few words about raising standards to give everyone a chance to succeed, and about teacher career development. And I think that the whole issue of the teacher effect, in our view, is absolutely crucial to improving standards. And sometimes, perhaps, we lose sight of the fact that the differences between attainment are often related to variations of the quality of teaching within schools rather than simply between schools. In recent years, Ofsted has talked about the generation of teachers we have now as being the best one ever, but we all know that there's more that can be done to improve the quality of teaching. And you've no doubt will have read the findings of this year's Ofsted annual report of outstanding schools inspected in 2010-11. 40% saw their overall grade drop. 14% of those inspected, 800 schools, were judged satisfactory in their last 2 or more consecutive inspections, and only 3% of teaching in secondary schools and 4% in primary schools was rated as outstanding, and that isn't good enough. 800 schools have been judged as satisfactory in consecutive inspections, and really they need to be making progress. And I think it's through excellent teaching that that's going to happen. We need to give the same emphasis to the importance of using teaching and learning strategies to improve the quality of teaching within schools as has sometimes been given to comparisons between schools. As I said earlier, we did much to recruit more teachers. By 2010 there were an additional 41,000 teachers in this country and 120,000 extra teaching assistants compared with 1997. But it isn't just about numbers, it's also about the status of teachers, and we think that through innovation schools can take forward opportunities to further enhance the quality and status of teaching, and the collaboration is at the heart of that approach. There's more I could say on that, but I'm conscious of time, and I want to just move on to say something more about teaching. Michael Wilshaw wrote in the Times recently that teaching at its best is, and he described it as, a noble profession. Well, that's true, but it's also about wealth creation as well. And I always say, never buy the lie that only companies create wealth. Our modern economy would never have developed and prospered without free state education, because that is the foundation of human capital upon which our economic prosperity depends. And just one poor teacher can blight a child's life chances, but it can also hurt the long-term economic performance of the country. So we need to be tough on bad teaching and support successful teaching and learning strategies for all sorts of reasons. Finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about funding and the Chancellor's autumn statement last week. The £1.2 billion that was announced to build new schools last week should be seen in the light of the £15.2 billion reduction in capital investment at the Comprehensive Spending Review last year. We prioritised capital investment towards deprived areas and towards building and refurbishing schools, but the Department of Education received one of the biggest reductions in capital spending under this government, more than double that of the average reduction in capital spending across government. So schools took double the hit on capital of other departments. And in the Institute of Fiscal Studies report on trends in education and school spending, which was published in October, they found that between 1999 and 2010, public spending on education as a whole grew by 5.1% per year in real terms. And as a result, public spending in education grew from 4.5% of national income in 1999 to 6.4% of national income in 2010. And that's why I'd like to dispute what was written in the brochure for this conference today, which said, and I quote, "As part of the Comprehensive Spending Review 2010, the government announced increased funding every year for the next 4 years for schools. This rise in funding will assist schools to deal with the increased numbers of students and help deliver the government's £2.5 billion pupil premium, which is aimed at helping to support the education of the most disadvantaged children in school." Well, in fact, yes, the state school population is set to increase from 6.95 million in 2010-11 to 7.14 million by 2014-15, which does mean that real spend per head is falling, but also, because of inflation, overall real spending on schools, and this is current spending now, not capital spending, is also falling. And the report showed that even after accounting for the pupil premium, which remember is supposed to be an additional sum on top of schools' budgets, Even after accounting for the pupil premium, the school budget will see a real term decline this academic year. So the answer to the question, when's a premium not a premium? When it's a pupil premium. There is no premium. Real spending is falling this year. Now, on top of this, we do face the whole business of the funding formula for schools. And a second piece of research published in November by the IFS, which is the only in-depth analysis published in the absence of any analysis from the Department for Education, estimates that 1 in 6 schools could see their budget reduced by at least 10%. And it also found that those reductions will be concentrated in certain local authorities, including places like Liverpool, Wolverhampton and Coventry. So yes, of course, funding formula reform is needed, but the funding system is in some respects a consequence of history rather than design. And change has to be tackled carefully and steadily to the funding system, or there will be severe consequences for some. I'll conclude by saying our job in government, in opposition, is to hold the government to account for what it's doing in education, to limit it where it's causing damage if we can, to be constructive when it's doing something right, and to plan for a future Labour government. The principles we'll plan for will be a commitment to the highest possible standards and a commitment to real opportunity for all children and not just some. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We've got time for a couple of quick questions from the floor. There's a lady in the red there.
I'm Sue Clark, and Head of Education and Learning from Devon County Council. I've got a question about the role of the local authority in this very diverse and autonomous landscape, and what role you feel the local authority can play within that, particularly as a new middle tier is emerging through the chains and sponsors of academies. And I just wonder how you think accountability could be played out rather than through market forces, but also through perhaps more democratic and challenge that can be brought to a local authority working with those different providers.
Okay, that's exactly the question I would have asked, so that's great. Kevin.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. It was
Sue Clark, Devon County Council.
Okay, well, thanks very much for the question. I mentioned the issue of cooperative trust. There are going to be a variety of models, obviously, as a result of this kind of Govian archipelago of schools that is being created by the conversion of nearly all schools, which is what the plan is, to academies. And I did a conference on this very question for Westminster City Council, asked by the Conservative Cabinet Member for Education to do the conference, because they were asking the very same questions that you were asking. I think there has to be a continuing role for local authorities to hold to account schools in their area, but I don't think the government has yet thought through what that position is. Certainly, I don't think we're going to retain the old system of accountability where it's assumed that accountability came through the ballot box in local council elections for all schools in an area. When they've got academy status and they've got autonomy, it's not going to work in that straightforward way. But where you do have groups of schools getting together and doing things like forming cooperative trusts, the principles and values upon which they base those trusts is very much to be part of the community and to have an element of, they have their own democratic systems for electing, they also have an element of representation for the local authority. I don't think schools can really have a proper relationship with the local community unless they have a good relationship with the local authority as well, even when they are academy schools. But at the moment, from the government's point of view, I don't think they've really formulated what they think the role of local authorities is anymore.
Thanks, Kevin. And we'll take this question here and then we'll move on.
Philip Woods, University of Hertfordshire. It's more of a comment, I think, a quick one. Very interested to hear you featuring cooperative schools, and I think on this issue of more democracy, there is, or the need for democracy, that there is a role for local authorities, but also a need to think differently about how democratic accountability occurs. It's more, I think, when you have more networks, more relationships, then it becomes more something that has to be carried out by lots and lots of different people. It's something that is, teachers need to be doing, students need to be learning as well. What it means to be part of a network of relationships where you are part of the democracy, where you both have rights and responsibilities too, as part of a democratic dialogue.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. Which is why the cooperative model is quite an attractive one, because that is built into the value structure of the trust itself, and that they obviously have a cooperative board that's elected from amongst the stakeholders in the school, and local authority representation can be part of that kind of structure. Things go wrong in schools, and during the course of the education bill, I remember asking Nick Gibb many times as we slaved away in committee for week after week on the bill. What happens if a head teacher does something wrong, or a board of governors? And his answer always seemed to be, well, head teachers never do anything wrong. They never do anything that would be not in the interest of their school or the children in the area in general. And head teachers are wonderful people, but we also know they're human beings, as are governors. And where human beings are running anything, things go wrong, and you need to have in place some form of accountability when you're spending billions of pounds of public money on educating children. So inevitably there must be some development of an accountable structure around all these independent state schools, so that we can ensure that when things go wrong, there's some way of putting it right.